They said he was too old to fight then one day. He'd destroyed 13 tanks. It was July 13th, 1943, a sweltering Tuesday on the Russian steppe near the village of Ponyri, during the greatest steel clash in history, the Battle of the Kursk Salient. Sergeant Zinovy Kolobanov, 42 commander of a KV-1 heavy tank, had been ordered to hold a strategic dirt road leading to the Red Army positions. His division commander had stared him down and said, "Comrade Kolobanov, you are one of our most veteran tankers. You fought since the war with Finland. You know this, your age is a disadvantage in this war of speed." Kolobanov, his face etched with crow's feet, and his eyes a cold gray, merely replied, "Comrade, I know how to shoot, and I know how to wait." He waited. He and his crew of 4, driver, gunner, loader, and machine gunner, camouflaged their KV-1 amidst a stand of tall birch trees near a swamp. They dug the earth out from under the tank's hull, lowering it so only the turret remained exposed. They covered it with branches and dry grass. The 45-ton tank vanished into the landscape. Kolobanov's plan was simple and brutal. He wasn't going to intercept the enemy. He was going to annihilate them. The orders from the 1st Guards Tank Division were clear. Stop them. At all costs. Intelligence indicated a German armored brigade, possibly up to 60 tanks, was advancing in this direction. Kolobanov was given 5 tanks. He dispersed the other 4 to supporting positions. His position, on the main road, was the kill box. Before dawn, he called his tank commanders together and told them words that would later become legend. "We do not retreat. We are here to fight to the death. Every tank must be a fortress." Then he turned to his gunner, Andrei Usov, and said words Usov would remember for the rest of his life. "Usov, today you will shoot. You will shoot until your eyes go blind, until your hands cannot pull the trigger." Understood." Usov, a 22-year-old, nodded, his face pale. "Yes, Sergeant." Dawn broke, bringing silence. It was a heavy, threatening silence. Then, at 8:30 a.m., the first sound came the distant roar of diesel engines. And on the horizon, gray shapes began to appear. Not 1 or 2, but a whole column of Panzer IV tanks, moving in battle formation, their long 75mm guns scanning from side to side. Through his scope, Kolobanov counted 22. His heart pounded. He took a deep breath, his voice coming over the intercom, preternaturally calm. "Steady. Wait for my command. Aim for the lead. Usov, do you see the lead tank? Clear, Sergeant. Aim for the center of the turret. Wait for them to enter the trap." The column drew closer. 800 meters. 600 meters. Now they were in point-blank range. Kolobanov could clearly see the black crosses, the gray uniforms, and even the faces of the German gunners through his optics. He waited. He let the entire column advance into a narrow bend in the road, where they were forced to slow down and line up. This was the moment. "First vehicle!" Kolobanov's voice rang out. Firm. "Fire!" Usov pulled the trigger. The KV-1 rocked violently as the 76mm Z's IS-5 cannon spat fire. The armor-piercing round flew in a nearly flat trajectory, striking the lead Panzer IV square in the middle of its turret. A brilliant orange spark, followed by a violent explosion, the German tank's turret was blown off its hull like a bottle cap. Fire and black smoke billowed into the sky. "Hit!" Kolobanov yelled. "Second vehicle, fire." Usov traversed the turret, aimed, and fired again. The second tank, trying to evade, was hit square in the engine. It burst into flames immediately. Chaos engulfed the German column. They didn't even know where they were being shot from. The tanks began to spin, searching for the invisible enemy. Some fired their cannons into nearby woods, suspecting mines or anti-tank guns. They never suspected the threat came from a single, perfectly camouflaged heavy tank, lying dormant right in their path. Kolobanov, with the calm of a hunter, continued to call out targets. He picked them off one by one, prioritizing the closest and most dangerous. Usov, the one turning left, hit the tracks. Another shot. A Panzer IV lost its track, spinning hopelessly like a massive, wounded beetle. Then Kolobanov turned his attention to the last one in the column. The last one. Don't let it escape. Usov fired. The round tore through the German tank's weak rear armor, turning it into scrap metal. In less than 10 minutes, 6 German tanks were burning on the dirt road. The black smoke billowed, creating a screen over the battlefield. But Kolobanov knew this was just the beginning. The sound of new engines rumbled. A second, stronger German wave was coming. He looked through his scope, and his heart tightened. It wasn't just Panzer IVs now. These medium tanks were escorted by the real monsters, Panther tanks. With their thick frontal armor and long 75mm guns, the Panther was an extremely dangerous target. Usov. Kolobanov's voice crackled. Now the real work begins. Aim for their flanks. Only the flanks. Understood. Inside the KV-1, the temperature soared to nearly 50 degrees, 110 The acrid smell of gunpowder, sweat, and engine oil filled the cramped space. Usov constantly wiped sweat from his eyes, loaded, aimed, fired. His hands ached. His ears rang from the concussions. But he kept shooting. Kolobanov, with his vast combat experience, orchestrated the battle like a conductor. He ordered his driver, Grigoriev, to start the engine and reverse the tank slightly out of the burning grass to get a better firing angle, then shut it down again to stay hidden. This tactic further confused the enemy. They couldn't pinpoint the attacker's location. One Panther, suspecting the presence of an enemy tank, began firing its cannon toward the birch grove. A shell grazed the KV-1's turret, showering it with dirt and wood splinters. Kolobanov didn't even blink. Usov, the Panther firing at us. It can't see us. Aim for the flank, just behind the turret. Fire. Usov fired. Their 76mm round punched through the Panther's thin side armor. A second later, a dull boom echoed from within, and the hatches burst open, followed by gushing yellow flames and burning figures. The sight was horrific, but there was no time to think. Kolobanov was already on the next target. The battle raged all day. Kolobanov and his crew fought from the hot oven of their tank, without food, without water, with only one mission: destroy. They fired until they ran out of armor-piercing rounds, switched to high explosive, and finally to fragmentation rounds to engage the infantry accompanying the tanks. By late afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the clouds of smoke, the last of the engine sounds died away. Silence returned, broken only by the crackling of burning tanks. Kolobanov, exhausted, opened the hatch and stepped out. Before him was an unbelievable sight. Along the road and in the surrounding fields, 13 German tanks smoldered like giant torches. The turret of his KV-1 was deformed by at least 150 dents from enemy shells and machine gun fire, but not a single round had penetrated its thick armor. His crew emerged, their faces black with soot, eyes red with fatigue and stress. They had survived, and they had won. That day. Sergeant Zinovy Kolobanov, the soldier who was supposedly too old, not only defended the strategic road, but also wrote one of the most heroic chapters of the Great Patriotic War. His actions and those of his crew had halted the advance of a German armored brigade, contributing significantly to the overall victory at the Battle of the Kursk Salient. He became a symbol of the Red Army's courage and resilience. The story of the lone tank hunter against an armored legion became a legend, inspiring generations of soldiers to come. Kolobanov's victory was not the result of recklessness or random luck. It was a combination of brilliant tactics, a deep understanding of military engineering, and an iron will forged through years of battlefield experience. While other, younger soldiers might rely on agility and youthful vigor, Kolobanov used his strongest weapon, patience, and situational analysis. After repelling the first assault, Kolobanov ordered his crew to recheck all weapons systems and ammunition. Their KV-1 had already used nearly half of its armor-piercing rounds. Usov. "How many AP rounds left?" Kolobanov asked, his voice still perfectly calm, despite the surrounding smoke and fire. 32 rounds left. "Sergeant?" Usov replied after a quick check of the ammo racks. "Enough to continue," Kolobanov said, his eyes never leaving the periscope. "But from now on, every shot must be precise. We cannot waste ammunition." The driver, Grigoriev, spoke up. "Sergeant, the engine is running fine, but the temperature is rising. The cooling system might overload if we continue this high-intensity fighting." Kolobanov nodded. "I understand. But we have no choice. Shut down the engine when possible to conserve fuel and lower the temperature." Kolobanov's caution and meticulous calculation clearly showed the difference between a young soldier and a seasoned warrior. While young soldiers often acted on instinct and enthusiasm, Kolobanov always kept a cool head, calculating every aspect of the battle from ammunition and fuel to the technical condition of the tank. About 30 minutes after the first attack ended, the familiar sound of German tank engines roared again. This time, they came with a different tactic. Instead of advancing straight in formation, the German tanks split into 3 small groups, using the terrain for cover and approaching from different directions. One group continued down the main road, while the other 2 tried to flank from either side. "They've learned their lesson," Kolobanov muttered, "but not well enough." He quickly gave orders over the radio to the other tanks in his unit. Team 2 handled the group on the left. Team 3 blocked the group on the right. Teams 4 and 5 provide support from a distance. We will deal with the central group. This clear delegation of tasks showed Kolobanov's tactical vision. He wasn't just commanding his own tank. He was coordinating the entire battle, turning 5 scattered tanks into a unified and solid defensive line. The central German tank group, consisting of 4 Panzer IVs and 2 Panthers, advanced to about 500 meters from Kolobanov's position. They began a clearing fire, shelling every suspicious location. One shell exploded just 10 meters from Kolobanov's KV-1, showering the turret roof with dirt. "Steady," Kolobanov's voice echoed in the intercom. "They still haven't spotted us. Usov, aim for the lead Panther. Wait for it to show its side." Kolobanov's patience was rewarded once again. The Panther, while maneuvering to find a target, inadvertently exposed its left flank. "Fire!" Kolobanov ordered. Usov didn't waste the opportunity. The armor-piercing round flew straight into the Panther's engine compartment, turning it into a wreck in seconds. The remaining German tanks reacted instantly. They concentrated their fire on Kolobanov's position. Dozens of shells rained down. But the KV-1, with its 90mm of turret armor, withstood them all. "Grigoriev, reverse 5 meters. We need to change position," Kolobanov ordered. This slight change of position further confused the enemy. They couldn't pinpoint Kolobanov's exact location, while one by one, the German tanks became prey for Usov's cannon. By noon, Kolobanov and his crew had destroyed 4 more enemy tanks. But the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The temperature inside the tank reached over 50 degrees 102, the air suffocating with gunpowder smoke and the smell of oil. The ventilation system was working poorly, leaving the entire crew near exhaustion. "Sergeant, we need a break," the machine gunner, Demyanov, spoke up. "The comrades can't continue much longer." Kolobanov looked around at his crew. Usov was panting, his hands shaking as he loaded a round. Grigoriev was pale from the heat and fatigue. But Kolobanov knew they couldn't stop. "We will rest for 5 minutes," he said. "Everyone takes 1 sip of water. Then we continue fighting. Remember, behind us are our comrades, our innocent people. If we fail, they will pay the price." Kolobanov's words seemed to give the crew new strength. They knew what they were fighting for. It wasn't just a military objective. It was a mission to protect the motherland, to protect the lives of thousands of Russian civilians behind them. When the third attack began in the early afternoon, Kolobanov and his crew were ready. This time, the Germans used a new tactic. They combined tanks with infantry, using foot soldiers to scout the positions of the Russian tanks. "They're sending in infantry," Kolobanov said. "This is a sign of desperation. Usov, use fragmentation rounds. Demyanov, machine gun ready." The battle now became more complex. Kolobanov not only had to deal with enemy tanks, but also had to stop the infantry from reaching his position. He directed the fight with astonishing composure, logically dividing targets between the main gun and the machine gun. A group of German infantry tried to approach from the right. Demyanov opened up with the DT-29 machine gun, forcing them to take cover. Usov continued to destroy enemy tanks from a distance. The crew's seamless coordination was the result of thorough training and absolute trust in each other. By 4:00 p.m., the battle gradually ended. The Germans, having lost a total of 13 tanks in just 1 day in this sector, were forced to withdraw. Silence descended on the battlefield, broken only by the popping and crackling of the burning tanks. Kolobanov opened the hatch, taking a deep breath of fresh air. Before him was evidence of one of the greatest feats in the history of armored warfare. 13 enemy tanks destroyed, all by a single tank. The post-battle silence enveloped the battlefield like a shroud. Kolobanov stood on the turret, his gray eyes sweeping over the scene of destruction before him. 13 columns of black smoke rose from the burning German tanks, creating a horrific but symbolic picture. The smell of burning fuel, charred flesh, and gunpowder mingled into an unforgettable stench of war. In that moment, the 42-year-old tank commander felt no joy of victory, only a boundless fatigue and a strange emptiness. He looked down at his hands that had held a hoe, a plow, and now a tank's controls. They were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the accumulated stress of the long day. Below, the crew members began to crawl out of the tank. Usov, the young gunner, collapsed to the ground, holding his head in his hands. "I can't believe it. We did it." His voice choked. Grigoriev, the driver, leaned against the tank's hull, his face covered in sweat and grease. He pulled out a crumpled cigarette, trying to light it, but his hands shook too much, causing the match to go out repeatedly. Kolobanov climbed down, took a matchbox from his pocket, and lit the cigarette for his comrade. "Smoke?" he said, his voice hoarse from the fumes and fatigue. "You all fought bravely." Just then, a red army jeep sped toward them, kicking up a cloud of dust. A field-grade officer stepped out, his face undisguised astonishment as he took in the scene. "Sergeant Kolobanov," the officer said, his voice full of respect. "I am Colonel Ivanov from Front Command. I was ordered to assess the situation. But it seems you've handled everything yourselves." He scanned the battlefield, mentally counting the destroyed enemy tanks. "Did you, alone, destroy all of them?" Kolobanov nodded, his tone humble. "Colonel, we were just following orders." This humility was characteristic of true Soviet soldiers, who always put duty before personal fame. But the aftermath of the battle wasn't just about joy and recognition. As night fell, Kolobanov and his crew faced the first signs of psychological trauma. The horrific images of the battle haunted them, the screams of German soldiers trapped in burning tanks, the smell of charred human flesh, and the feeling of the hot trigger guard every time they fired. Usov couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw tanks exploding and burning figures. "I've killed so many people," Usov whispered in the darkness of the temporary barracks. Kolobanov, with the experience of a soldier who had seen many battles, sat down next to the young gunner. "Listen to me, Usov." His voice was deep and steady. "Those were not men you killed. That was the enemy. Every tank you destroyed today means hundreds of other Soviet soldiers will live. Thousands of civilians will not be murdered. You are not a murderer. You are a defender of the motherland." Kolobanov's words couldn't completely erase the trauma, but they helped Usov and the other young soldiers find solace and a reason to keep fighting. That was the difference between a young soldier and a seasoned commander, the ability to see the bigger picture, beyond the immediate horrors of war. The next morning, news of Kolobanov's feat spread throughout the front. A young military reporter came to see him, eager to write the story. "Sergeant Kolobanov, please tell us about this glorious battle. How did one tank manage to destroy an entire German armored battalion?" Kolobanov stared at the reporter, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. "There is nothing glorious about war, comrade reporter," he said, his voice heavy. "There is only necessity. We did what we had to do to protect our country." This attitude reflected the practical and humble nature of true Soviet soldiers, who did not seek glory but only wanted to complete their mission. However, Kolobanov's achievement could not be ignored. The Front Command decided to award him the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor in the country. But even in that moment of glory, Kolobanov did not forget his comrades. "I cannot accept this honor alone," he declared at the award ceremony. "This achievement belongs to my entire crew, Usov, Grigoriev, Demyanov, and all the soldiers who fought and died in this battle." Kolobanov's feat quickly became a legend, spreading across the fronts as a testament to the Red Army's courage and indomitable spirit. But behind the glory was a little-known fact. This very event made Kolobanov a special target for the Germans. Just 3 days after the historic battle, a special directive from the German High Command was issued. Destroy KV-1 tank number 864 and its commander at all costs. The reward for killing Kolobanov was set at 100,000 Reichsmarks, a huge sum at the time. Kolobanov and his crew quickly realized this new danger. In a subsequent engagement, they found the Germans had changed their tactics completely. Instead of massed assaults, they used specialized anti-tank teams equipped with anti-tank grenade launchers and magnetic mines. Once, a German commando team managed to sneak within 50 meters of the KV-1 before being spotted. "They're hunting us like special prey," Grigoriev whispered after the commandos were eliminated. The psychological pressure mounted. Every time he went into battle, Kolobanov knew he was the #1 priority target. But instead of being afraid, he used this to his advantage. "Let them focus on us," he told his crew. "That way, other units will have a better chance." This sense of responsibility made him even more cautious in every tactical decision. In late July 1943, during a fierce battle near the village of Voronezh, tragedy struck. A shell from a Panther tank hit the KV-1's frontal armor, although it didn't penetrate. The explosion damaged the vision systems and wounded the entire crew. Kolobanov was severely wounded in the head and chest, while Usov took shrapnel in his arm. "Sergeant, I can't see anything," Grigoriev cried out as his vision slit-shattered. In that critical situation, Kolobanov's combat experience once again saved the day. Despite being badly injured, he ordered Grigoriev to reverse the tank to a safe position while Demyanov provided covering fire with the machine gun. "Don't let them surround us," Kolobanov ordered, his voice weak but still resolute. Thanks to his clear-headed command, they escaped the encirclement and were evacuated to the rear. Kolobanov's injuries were more serious than expected. He spent nearly 3 months in the hospital and would never be able to return to combat in a tank. Military doctors found he had suffered a traumatic brain injury and several broken ribs when he woke up after a 2-day coma. The first thing he asked was, "Where is my crew? How is our tank?" During his time in the hospital, Kolobanov received hundreds of letters from all over the Soviet Union. There were letters from mothers thanking him for protecting their sons, letters from children who saw him as an idol, and letters from former comrades. But the letter that moved him most was from a young soldier in the 284th Rifle Division. "Because of you, our unit did not have to face those German tanks. We are probably alive today, thanks to your silent sacrifice." In November 1943, Kolobanov was discharged from the hospital with a medical status that only allowed him to serve in a training role. He was assigned to the tank training school in Kazan, where he passed on his invaluable combat experience to a new generation of warriors. His training methods were practical and harsh. "You think war is glorious?" he would often ask the young cadets. "Forget it. War is blood, sweat, and tears. A good commander is not one who destroys many enemy tanks, but one who brings his crew back safely after every battle." Although no longer fighting directly, Kolobanov's legacy continued to spread. His students later became outstanding tank commanders, many of whom were also awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. His combat motto, "Patience and precision are more important than recklessness," became a guiding principle for generations of Soviet tankers. After the war, Kolobanov returned to his homeland with a body and soul full of scars. He worked in a tractor factory in Minsk, living a simple life like millions of other veterans. But the story of the battle on July 13, 1943 was never forgotten. It became a symbol of courage and quiet sacrifice. Proof that in war, not all heroes need to be young or physically strong. The most important things are an indomitable will and a heart dedicated to the motherland. Until the end of his life, Kolobanov kept the habit of waking up at 4:00 a.m. every day. A relic of the stressful days of combat when every dawn could bring the threat of a German attack. His small apartment in Minsk had little furniture, but on his desk there was always a faded photograph of him, with the entire crew of KV-1 number 864, the men who had made history with him. Every year on July 13th, Kolobanov would write letters to the families of his fallen comrades, telling them about his current life and reminiscing about the nation's finest sons. In 1958, when the Soviet Army began to decommission the KV-1 tank, Kolobanov received a special gift, the gun sight from his legendary tank. The gift was sent by Usov himself, now a design engineer at a tank factory. Enclosed with the gift was a short letter, "To my dear commander, this sight witnessed our courage. Now, let it guard your sleep." From then on, the gun sight was placed on his nightstand like a sacred relic. In the peaceful years, Kolobanov was often invited to schools to tell his stories to the younger generation. But unlike many other veterans, he never depicted war as a heroic adventure. Children, his voice would lower whenever he spoke to them. The most terrible thing about war isn't the sound of exploding shells, but the silence after the battle when you see your friends who will never return. His talks always ended with the same message: cherish the peace you have, because it was bought with the blood of millions. In the early 1970s, Kolobanov's health began to decline seriously. Old wounds tormented him, especially when the weather changed. But his spirit remained sharp. Once, while being treated in the hospital, a young nurse asked if he was the hero from the famous battle. Kolobanov shook his head. "My dear, the real heroes are the ones left on the battlefield. I am just a lucky survivor." In August 1994, though his health was very poor, Kolobanov still managed to attend the 50th anniversary celebration of the liberation of Belarus. In his wheelchair, his eyes lit up when he saw the new generations of young soldiers. When a young officer asked him the secret to victory, Kolobanov spoke his last public words: "The secret. It is love for the country and responsibility for comrades. When you fight for something greater than yourself, you become invincible." Zinovy Kolobanov passed away on September 8, 1994, leaving behind a legacy of courage and humility. His funeral was attended by thousands, from old veterans to the younger generation. Usov, now an old man, stood before his former commander's casket and said, "We have not only lost a hero, but a piece of history. But his lessons of courage and patience will live on forever." The legacy of Zinovy Kolobanov did not fade with time. Immediately after his death, veterans from the 1st Tank Division lobbied for a street in St. Petersburg to be named after him. Not only that, the Museum of Military History in Moscow dedicated a special exhibit to the Battle of July 13, 1943, which included Kolobanov's helmet and tactical map. Most notably, the letter written by Usov in 1958 and the legendary gun sight are also displayed there, alongside faded black and white photographs. But perhaps the most important legacy Kolobanov left is in military training manuals. His tank ambush methods were studied thoroughly and became a classic lesson in military academies. A retired general from the Voroshilov Military Academy once remarked, "Kolobanov's tactic is a perfect testament to how a well-prepared position and patience can be far more effective than superior firepower." New generations of officers continue to study this battle as a prime example of the art of ambush and the use of terrain in armored warfare. The story of Kolobanov even crossed the borders of Russia. In 2006, a group of German military historians traveled to Minsk to learn more about the battle. Dr. Klaus Richter, the head of the research group, said, "We wanted to better understand this historical event from both sides. The resilience of Kolobanov and his crew is a lesson in fighting spirit, while the failure of the German army in that battle shows the danger of underestimating the enemy." This visit led to a joint exhibition at the Dresden Museum of Military History, where the story of the battle was retold from both perspectives. In Kolobanov's hometown, a small village in the Leningrad region, the people erected a modest but moving memorial. It is not a large statue, but a granite stone engraved with the image of a KV-1 and the words, "Here was born Zinovy Kolobanov," who taught us that age is never a barrier to courage. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, local school children come to lay flowers and listen to veterans tell stories about their heroic native son. Kolobanov's family continues to preserve his precious mementos. His son, Sergei Kolobanov, now a history teacher, often brings his father's memorabilia to his classes. The students are often surprised to see that a real hero was so simple. Sergei shared, "My father always said he just did what any Soviet soldier would have done in that situation." In the 21st century, Kolobanov's story continues to spread through new forms. A documentary about his life was produced in 2018, which included rare interview footage with the surviving members of his crew, video games, historical websites, and military forums all have lively discussions about his feat. This proves the enduring power of a story of true courage. But perhaps the deepest meaning of Kolobanov's legacy is the lesson about the strength of the human will. In a world that often overvalues youth and physical strength, Kolobanov's story reminds us that experience, wisdom, and steadfastness are the qualities that make the real difference. A military historian summarized it. Kolobanov proved that in actual combat conditions, an experienced soldier with a deep understanding of tactics is worth far more than a young soldier relying only on strength and enthusiasm. To this day, in the barracks of the Russian armored forces, Kolobanov's picture is still hung with honor as a symbol of courage and tactical genius. Young tankers still learn his motto, "One accurate shot is more important than 100 lucky ones," and in the hearts of history lovers, Zinovy Kolobanov will forever be a symbol of an ordinary man who did extraordinary things, a testament that age is never a barrier when the heart is full of passion and ideals. The final years of Zinovy Kolobanov were a testament to the humble character and sense of responsibility of a true soldier. Though praised as a hero, he always refused all special privileges and lived a simple life in his small apartment in Minsk. Every month, he would regularly visit military museums, where he would quietly explain the artifacts of war to the younger generation without ever identifying himself as the main character in those stories. Museum staff recounted that he would often stand silently for hours before the exhibit on the Battle of Kursk, his eyes full of emotion as he looked at the relics of his old comrades. Kolobanov's health began to decline noticeably in 1990. Old war wounds tormented him more and more, especially the traumatic brain injury that caused him frequent, severe headaches. Doctors discovered that small shrapnel fragments still remained in his body after nearly half a century. Yet, Kolobanov never complained about the physical pain. During one hospital stay, when a nurse asked about his pain, he gently replied, "These are just reminders of a time gone by, helping me never to forget the comrades who fell." In 1993, though, his health was very poor. Kolobanov still managed to complete his final manuscript on tank tactics. In his small room, filled with books and documents, he diligently wrote down every precious piece of combat experience. This manuscript was later used as teaching material by the Malinovsky Military Academy. But Kolobanov refused to put his name on it as the author. He told the editors, "This knowledge belongs to all the tank soldiers who fought and died, not to me alone." In his final days, Kolobanov would often sit in his old armchair, looking out the window and listening to the sound of children playing outside. Neighbors recounted that they sometimes heard him murmuring names: Usov, Grigoriev, Demyanov, his fallen comrades. Fallen. One autumn afternoon in 1994, Kolobanov called his children to him and gave them his last instructions. Live in a way that is worthy of the peace that so many fell to achieve. Do not ever let the blood of heroes be shed in vain. Zinovy Kolobanov's funeral took place on a lightly rainy day in September. Thousands came to bid him farewell, from old veterans to the younger generation. Usov, now an old man with white hair, stood before his former commander's casket and said his goodbyes. Our beloved commander is gone, but his lessons of courage and patience will endure forever. He taught us that in war, victory is made not just from weapons, but from intellect and an indomitable will. After Kolobanov's death, it was discovered that his will contained a special request that no monuments be built for him personally. Instead, he wanted the money to be used to support veterans in difficult circumstances and to build a library for children. For this request was honored by his family and the government. To this day, the Zinovy Kolobanov Library still operates in his hometown, nurturing the minds of many young generations. The spiritual legacy Kolobanov left behind lives on in the heart of the Russian people. His name is given to streets, schools, and military awards. But perhaps the most profound remembrance lies in the hearts of today's Russian armored forces. They still sing about him in their traditional songs, still tell the story of the Battle of July 13th as a living legend. And in every course in the military academies, the image of the 42-year-old tank commander with bright eyes and a will of steel remains an eternal symbol of courage and quiet sacrifice. The story of Zinovy Kolobanov is not just a story of a historic battle, but also a lesson in human character. He proved that in the decisive moments of history, age is not a barrier, experience is not a burden, and true courage comes from a patriotic heart and a sense of responsibility to one's comrades. To this day, whenever his name is mentioned, people still remember an ordinary soldier who did extraordinary things, a humble man who became a legend, and a teacher who taught future generations the lesson of true courage.